The autumn sun cut through the smoke, lingering over the Pentagon's officer shooting range, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, where America's military elite gathered for their monthly informal competition. The sound of clinking whiskey glasses mixed with the crack of rifles as 20 senior officers in various states of undress uniform lounged around outdoor tables, their jackets thrown carelessly over chairs, ties loosened, top buttons undone. General Marcus Iron Shepard stood at the center of it all, a mountain of a man at 6'4", with shoulders that still filled his Marine Corps dress blues after 30 years of service. His weathered face bore the scars of 3 tours in Afghanistan, a jagged line running from his left temple to his jaw that he wore like a badge of honor. The 58-year-old commander of Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance lifted his crystal tumbler high, the amber liquid catching the light. "Gentlemen and ladies," his voice boomed across the range, that commanding baritone that had ordered men into battle from Fallujah to Kandahar. "Who here thinks they've got what it takes to hit a spinning quarter at 20 yards? The gathered officers laughed, shaking their heads. Colonel Patricia Hayes, a sharp-featured woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, crossed her arms. "That's impossible, Shepard. Even for you." "Impossible?" Shepard's eyes gleamed with the competitive fire that had earned him 3 silver stars and a chest full of commendations. "Nothing's impossible for a United States Marine." He pulled a quarter from his pocket, flipping it between scarred fingers. $1,000 to anyone who can do it. Hell, I'll make it 2,000. The crowd stirred with interest, but nobody stepped forward. These were desk warriors now, Pentagon brass who hadn't fired anything more challenging than angry emails in years. Their shooting was recreational, their skills rusty from years of conference rooms and congressional hearings. That's when Shepard's gaze swept across the periphery of the gathering, landing on a figure everyone else had forgotten was even there. Joan Miller stood by the refreshment table, methodically collecting empty glasses onto a silver tray. At 42, she was utterly unremarkable in every way that mattered to men like Shepard. Her light brown hair was pulled up in a messy bun that suggested she'd been working since dawn, loose curls escaping to frame her face. Her fitted light gray t-shirt was practical, professional, forgettable. Dark military surplus pants and worn brown combat boots completed the picture of someone who existed solely to blend into the background. For 15 years, Joan Miller had been the Pentagon's most invisible employee. As senior stenographer for classified briefings, she sat in corners of secure rooms, her fingers flying across her specialized keyboard, recording every word spoken by the nation's most powerful military leaders. She was furniture with a pulse, a recording device in human form. Nobody noticed her arrival, nobody marked her departure. She was simply there, and then she wasn't. "Mrs. Miller!" Shepard's voice cracked like a whip across the range. The gathered officers turned, surprised to realize the help was still present. "Why don't you take a shot? Show these desk jockeys how it's done?" The laughter that erupted was cruel in its unanimity. Major Dennis Brett, a thick-necked intelligence officer with a Pentagon gym membership he advertised with every too-tight shirt, slapped his knee. "That's Rich, Shepard, the secretary with a gun. I'll bet $100 she shoots her own foot before she hits anything in the air," Colonel Hayes added, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Assuming she even knows which end the bullet comes from." Joan set down her tray with deliberate care. The soft clink of glass on wood somehow carried across the range. She turned, and for the first time that afternoon, really looked at the assembled officers. Her green eyes, usually downcast and focused on her stenography machine, swept across the group with an expression none of them could quite read. "I don't gamble, General," she said. Her voice was quiet, carrying a slight accent that 15 years in Washington hadn't quite erased. Something Eastern European, maybe Russian, though her personnel file listed her birthplace as Cleveland. "Come on, Miller," Shepard pressed, sensing blood in the water. The crowd always loved a good humiliation. And what better entertainment than watching the help fumble with weapons of war? "I'll make it interesting. You hit that quarter, I'll donate 5,000 to any charity you want. You miss." He paused, savoring the moment. "You tell us all about your confirmed kills. I'm betting the only things you've ever killed are the roaches in the file room." The laughter crescendoed. Some woman started a slow clap. Joan's fingers twitched at her side, a movement so small only someone watching closely would have noticed. She walked toward the weapons display with measured steps, each footfall precise despite the uneven ground. The wall-mounted rack held various firearms, trophies, and gifts accumulated over decades of military exchanges. An M4 carbine from Iraq, a captured AK-47 from Afghanistan, a chrome-plated Colt 45 presented by the Texas National Guard, and there, on the bottom rack like an afterthought, a Mosin Nagant rifle, its wooden stock scarred and weathered, the metal worn smooth in places by countless hands. A placard beneath read, "Captured Soviet weapon, Cold War relic, 1962. Joan's hand moved to the Mosin Nagant without hesitation. The way she lifted it from the rack made several officers stop mid-laugh. There was no fumbling, no uncertainty. Her hands found their positions like water finding its level, the rifle becoming an extension of her body in one fluid motion. "That piece of junk hasn't been fired in 20 years, Major Brett called out. "The ammunition's probably older than you are, sweetheart." Joan pulled back the bolt with a smooth, practiced motion that sang of muscle memory. She examined the chamber, her fingers checking points on the weapon that most of the officers wouldn't even know existed. From a dusty ammunition box beneath the display, she selected 5 rounds, rolling each between her fingers before loading them with economical precision. "This is a 7.62 by 54 millimeter rimmed cartridge," she said conversationally, her accent becoming slightly more pronounced. "Developed in 1891 for the Russian Imperial Army, still in use today because physics doesn't expire, Major Brett." The laughter died to uncertain chuckles. General Shepard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing as he watched Joan work the rifle's action. Something about her stance, the way she held the weapon's weight, triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. A winter morning 30 years ago, snow falling on a compound outside Prague, the smell of cordite and fear. "Toss the quarter, General," Joan said. She stood in a modified Weaver stance that had gone out of fashion 2 decades ago, her body angled precisely 45 degrees to the target line. But there was something about it, something in the way her weight distributed, the microscopic adjustments she made without thought. Captain Thomas Lewis, the youngest officer present at 31, had seen that stance before in grainy historical footage from Stalingrad, from the ruins of Grozny, from every major urban conflict where Soviet snipers had turned city blocks into killing fields. Shepard flicked the quarter high into the air, the silver disc spinning and catching the late afternoon sun. The crowd held its collective breath. Time seemed to crystallize, each rotation of the coin visible as a separate frame. Joan didn't track the coin's rise. Her eyes stayed fixed on a point in space, calculating trajectory, wind speed, rate of fall. Her finger squeezed the trigger with the same pressure you'd use to ring a doorbell. No jerking, no anticipation, just smooth backward travel. The rifle cracked once. The quarter exploded into 2 perfect halves, each piece spinning away in opposite directions before landing in the grass 20 yards downrange. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. 20 of America's most senior military officers stood frozen, drinks halfway to lips, eyes wide with disbelief. The only sound was the soft whisper of wind through the trees and the metallic tick of the cooling rifle barrel. Joan ejected the spent casing with a casual flick of the bolt, catching it in her left hand before it hit the ground. She placed the rifle back on the rack with the same careful precision she'd used to collect dirty glasses, then turned to face the assembled officers. "Your donation, General," she said quietly. "The Arlington Veterans Children Fund would be appropriate." Shepard's face had gone pale beneath his permanent tan. His hand holding the whiskey glass trembled slightly, the liquid sloshing against crystal. He stared at Joan as if seeing her for the first time, his mind racing through memories, trying to place where he'd seen that exact stance, that precise trigger discipline. Prague, 1985, a snowy morning, a woman's silhouette in a window. That was, Colonel Hayes started, then stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Lucky," Major Brett supplied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Pure luck." "Luck," Joan repeated, the word rolling off her tongue like she was tasting wine. "Yes, Major. Luck is what we call skill when we don't understand what we're seeing." She picked up her tray of glasses and walked back toward the main Pentagon building, her boots making soft sounds on the grass. Behind her, the party remained frozen in tableau, 20 of America's finest military minds trying to process what they'd just witnessed. General Shepard set down his glass with excessive care. His eyes never left Joan's retreating figure. With his right hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an encrypted phone. His fingers dialed a number from memory, a number he hadn't used in 5 years. "It's Iron," he said quietly, turning away from the group. "I need you to pull everything we have on Joan Miller. Pentagon stenographer, employee ID 74916. He paused, watching Joan disappear through the security door. "And check our Prague files from '85. Everything from Operation Snowfall." Captain Lewis, standing at the edge of the group, noticed the general's call. The young JAG officer had been investigating irregularities in military supply contracts for 6 months. Irregularities that seemed to trace back to Shepard's oversight committee. He made a mental note to check what Operation Snowfall was, adding it to his growing list of questions about the legendary Marine general. As the party slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones, nobody noticed the small smile that had played across Joan's lips just before she'd entered the building. Nobody saw her deposit the spent shell casing in a trash bin, the Cyrillic inscription on its base disappearing under coffee grounds and napkins. And certainly nobody observed the way her fingers had traced a pattern on the rifle stock before setting it down. A pattern that matched the identification marks used by Soviet GRU operatives during the Cold War. The next morning arrived gray and humid, typical October weather for Northern Virginia. The Pentagon hummed with its usual controlled chaos as 8,000 military and civilian personnel moved through its corridors like blood cells through arteries. Joan Miller sat in conference room 4B117, a secure facility 3 levels underground, her stenotype machine positioned at the perfect angle to capture every word spoken at the mahogany table. She had arrived at 0530 hours, 2 hours before the scheduled briefing, to review the previous day's transcripts. Her desk in the stenographer's pool was a study in minimalism. No family photos, no personal touches, just neat stacks of classified transcripts awaiting final review. And a single potted orchid that somehow thrived despite the fluorescent lights. The Joint Chiefs briefing was scheduled for 0800 hours. The subject? Irregularities in supply chain logistics for forward operating bases in Syria and Yemen. Captain Lewis would be presenting his preliminary findings, a move that had surprised everyone given his relatively junior rank. What they didn't know was that Lewis had uncovered something significant enough to bypass normal channels. Joan's fingers moved across her keyboard, warming up with practice sentences, the mechanical clicking as rhythmic as a heartbeat. She'd been doing this for 15 years, creating perfect records of imperfect people, making imperfect decisions about perfect weapons. Every word, every pause, every classified detail flowed through her fingers into the permanent record. General Shepard entered at 0755, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a fight that mattered, but this morning, there was something different about him. His eyes swept the room and lingered on Joan for a fraction longer than necessary. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his tone professionally neutral, "I trust you're ready for today's briefing?" "Always, General," Joan replied without looking up from her machine. Her fingers never stopped moving, transcribing even this casual exchange. In her peripheral vision, she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The previous night, Shepard had spent 6 hours reviewing files that hadn't been touched in 3 decades. Operation Snowfall, Prague, winter of 1985. He'd been a captain then, part of a joint CIA military intelligence unit tracking Soviet GRU operatives in Eastern Europe. There had been an incident, a safe house compromise. His entire unit captured except for him. The interrogator had been a woman, young then, perhaps mid-20s, with green eyes that seemed to see through lies like glass. He remembered those 3 days in vivid detail. The cold concrete room, the single bulb swinging overhead, the woman who never raised her voice but extracted information with surgical precision. She'd known things, personal things, leverage points that shouldn't have been in any file. By the end, he'd given her everything. Safe house locations, agent names, operational protocols. In exchange, she'd let him live. The official report listed him as the sole survivor of a botched operation, a hero who'd maintained operational security under extreme duress. The truth was buried deeper than any classification level could reach. The woman had disappeared after the fall of the Berlin Wall, presumably dead or burned by her own government. GRU Colonel Marina Volkov, age 27, one of the youngest female colonels in Soviet intelligence history. But that stance yesterday, that precise, archaic Weaver stance that Soviet special forces had taught their snipers, The way she'd held the Mosin Nagant like it was an old friend. The slight Eastern European accent that became more pronounced when she was concentrating. The briefing room filled quickly. Colonel Hayes took her position at Shepard's right hand, her tablet already displaying classified supply manifests. Major Brett slouched in his chair, still skeptical about the junior captain's presentation. Admiral Rebecca Foster from Naval Intelligence, General James Crawford from the Army, and a half-dozen other flag officers arranged themselves around the table like pieces on a chessboard. Captain Lewis entered last, carrying a locked briefcase that he placed carefully on the table. At 31, he looked even younger among the gray-haired brass, his JAG insignia gleaming on his collar. He'd been up all night preparing, knowing that what he was about to present would either make his career or end it. "Gentlemen, ladies," Lewis began, his voice steady despite the weight of rank staring back at him. "What I'm about to show you represents 6 months of investigation into systematic irregularities in our supply chain management for forward operating bases." Joan's fingers flew across her keys, capturing every word in the specialized shorthand that would later be translated into perfect English. Her eyes never left her screen, but her peripheral awareness tracked every movement in the room. Shepard's left hand, she noticed, had developed a slight tremor. Lewis activated the secure display, bringing up a map of the Middle East overlaid with supply routes. "We've identified 17 instances in the last 18 months where shipments of weapons, ammunition, and sensitive communications equipment have been diverted from their intended destinations." "Diverted how?" Admiral Foster interrupted. "Lost? Stolen?" "Sold, Admiral," Lewis replied. "Sold to the highest bidder through a complex network of shell companies and intermediate handlers. The total value exceeds $40 million. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Hayes demanded to see authorization for such an investigation. Brett questioned Lewis's sources. Crawford wanted to know how deep the corruption went. Through it all, Joan typed, creating a perfect record of powerful people, realizing their kingdom had termites in its foundation. "The diversions were authorized at the highest levels," Lewis continued, pulling up a new slide showing approval signatures. Each one signed off by the Marine Corps Special Operations Oversight Committee. Every eye in the room turned to General Shepard. As chair of that committee, his signature would be on every authorization. "Captain," Shepard's voice was dangerously quiet, "are you suggesting that I personally authorized the theft of $40 million in military equipment?" "I'm not suggesting anything, General. I'm presenting facts. Your signature appears on every approval. However," Lewis paused, choosing his words carefully, "the signatures themselves appear to be forgeries. Expert forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless." Joan's fingers stopped moving for exactly 1.3 seconds, so brief that nobody noticed except Lewis, who had been watching her. In that pause, she made a decision that would change everything. As the meeting continued, accusations flying and tempers rising, Joan quietly opened a secondary program on her stenotype machine. Hidden beneath the standard transcription software was something she'd installed years ago, a program that could detect patterns in speech, identify stress markers, and flag potential deception. She'd never used it before, keeping it as insurance she hoped she'd never need to cash. The program immediately lit up when Shepard spoke. "These allegations are baseless," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of command. "Captain Lewis has obviously been misled by faulty intelligence. Deception? Probability, 92%. Joan watched the readout while maintaining her typing rhythm. Every word Shepard spoke registered as a lie. Every denial, every redirect, every attempt to shift blame. The man was guilty, and her machine knew it. At 09:15, she made her first move. While the officers argued, she typed a brief message in her personal shorthand, a code she'd developed that looked like transcription errors to anyone else. She incorporated it into the official transcript, knowing that Lewis, as the presenting officer, would receive a copy for review. The message read, "Supply routes compromised. Check detention site Delta. Manifests against shipping logs. Cross-reference with insurance claims for lost equipment." Lewis noticed the anomaly when he reviewed the transcript that afternoon. The seemingly random typos spelled out a clear message when isolated. Someone was helping him, someone with access to everything said in the Pentagon's most classified briefings. That evening, Joan stayed late in her office, ostensibly catching up on transcription backlog. In reality, she was accessing files she had no authorization to see, using passwords and protocols she'd memorized over 15 years of silent observation. Every officer who had ever logged into a secure terminal in her presence had unknowingly given her another piece of the puzzle. She found what she was looking for in a subdirectory of the Marine Corps Logistics Database. Shipping manifests that had been altered after the fact. The original versions saved only in cached backup files that nobody ever checked. The alterations all traced back to a single terminal, a single login, General Marcus Shepard. But more interesting was what she found in the metadata. Each alteration corresponded with a deposit into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account was registered to a shell company called Iron Security Solutions. Iron, Shepard's nickname. Joan printed nothing, downloaded nothing. She simply memorized the account numbers, the dates, the amounts. Her trained memory, which could hold entire conversations verbatim for hours, absorbed the information like a sponge. Then she carefully closed each file, erased the access logs, and went home. Her house in Arlington was as unremarkable as she was. A modest 2-story colonial on a tree-lined street, the kind of place where government employees lived quiet lives and minded their own business. She parked her 10-year-old Honda Civic in the driveway and checked her surroundings with habits that had never really died. The streetlight on the corner flickered in a pattern she didn't recognize. A van she'd never seen before was parked 3 houses down. The neighbor's dog, which always barked at her arrival, was silent. Joan entered her house through the front door, making noise, turning on lights. Then she slipped out the back, moving through shadows with a grace that belied her middle-aged appearance. She circled around to approach the van from behind, staying in blind spots, using parked cars as cover. Through the van's rear window, she could see surveillance equipment, high-end stuff, military grade, the kind of equipment that didn't end up in civilian hands without significant connections. She memorized the license plate, noted the make and model, then retreated back to her house. Inside, she went through her normal routine, dinner for one, evening news, a cup of tea. But underneath the table, her hands assembled something from components she'd hidden throughout the kitchen over the years. A small transmitter built from radio parts and household electronics. She activated it with a complex sequence of taps, sending a burst transmission that lasted less than 2 seconds. The message was simple: they know. 3,000 miles away in a small apartment in Moscow, an old man received the transmission. He hadn't heard from this particular asset in 5 years. The fact that she was breaking cover meant something significant was happening. He reached for his own encrypted phone and dialed a number that officially didn't exist. "Directorate 7, a voice answered in Russian. "Asset Marina has made contact," the old man said. "Condition yellow. Understood." "Do we extract?" "No," the old man replied, looking at the file he kept on his desk, the one marked with Joan Miller's real name. "She's survived this long by being invisible. Let's see what forced her to become visible." Back in Arlington, Joan was preparing for what she knew was coming. She moved through her house, making subtle preparations. A knife hidden behind a picture frame, a garrote wire threaded through a curtain rod. Basic tradecraft she hadn't used in decades, but hadn't forgotten. At exactly 2:15 a.m., they came. The team was professional, she'd give them that. 2 through the back door, 1 through the front, 1 covering the stairs. They moved with military precision, using hand signals, maintaining silence. Force recon, if she had to guess. Shepard's boys. Joan was waiting in the kitchen, sitting at her table with a cup of cold tea, wearing a faded nightgown that made her look like somebody's harmless aunt. The first operative through the door pointed his weapon at her, a suppressed HK-416 that probably cost more than she made in a month. "Mrs. Miller," he said through his balaclava, "you need to come with us." "May I finish my tea?" she asked mildly. The operative's stance relaxed slightly. She was just a middle-aged secretary after all. What could she possibly do against 4 trained killers? That moment of underestimation was all she needed. Joan threw the cold tea in his face, causing him to flinch. In the same motion, she rolled backward off her chair, grabbing the kitchen table and flipping it toward him. The heavy oak caught him in the chest, driving him into the operative behind him. She came up with a cast-iron skillet in her hand, swinging it in a devastating arc that connected with the third operative's temple, dropping him instantly. The fourth, coming from the living room, fired 2 shots that went wide as Joan dove behind the overturned refrigerator she'd loosened from the wall earlier for exactly this purpose. The refrigerator provided cover for exactly 3 seconds. She used them wisely, grabbing the microwave cord she'd modified into an improvised electroshock weapon. When the first operative rounded the corner, she pressed it against his neck, sending 30,000 volts through his nervous system. The second operative, recovering from the table impact, switched to his sidearm. Joan rolled across the floor, coming up inside his guard. A knife hand strike to his throat, a knee to his groin, and then she had his weapon. She didn't shoot him. The sound would bring police, complications she didn't need. Instead, she used the buttstock to deliver a precise blow to his mastoid process, dropping him unconscious. The entire fight had taken 23 seconds. Joan stood in her destroyed kitchen, breathing slightly heavily, surveying the 4 unconscious men. She recognized one of them despite the balaclava, Sergeant Hayes, Colonel Hayes's nephew, a good soldier following bad orders. She quickly searched them, finding exactly what she expected. No identification, clean weapons, nothing that could trace back to Shepard, but one of them had made a mistake. A phone, still logged into a secure Marine Corps server. She took photos of everything on the screen, then placed the phone back in the operative's pocket. They'd wake up in a few hours with splitting headaches and a story nobody would believe. 4 Force Recon operators taken down by a middle-aged secretary in her nightgown. Their careers would survive, but their egos wouldn't. Joan packed quickly, taking only what she needed: fake passport, emergency cash, a go bag she'd kept ready for 15 years. As she left through the back door, she placed a single sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. It contained one line of text in Russian: "The past is never past." She knew Shepard would understand the message. Prague, 1985. A young Marine captain who'd betrayed his entire unit to save his own life. A secret that had launched his career, built on the graves of men who'd trusted him. By dawn, Joan Miller had disappeared from Arlington, but she hadn't run far. She checked into a motel in Bethesda, under an assumed name, and spent the day preparing for her next move. Lewis needed more evidence, something undeniable, something that would hold up in a military tribunal. She had exactly what he needed. But first, she had to ensure her own survival. The encrypted phone she'd taken from her kitchen drawer, not the one the operatives might have found, but the one hidden inside the drawer itself, connected her to a number she hadn't called in 15 years. "Identity confirmation," a voice said in accented English. Joan responded in perfect Russian. "Marina Volkov, Colonel, Directorate 7. Authentication code, Snegurotchka." There was a pause, then, "Colonel Volkov, you've been dark for 15 years. What is your status?" "Compromised but operational. I need a dead drop. Alexandria region. Something public, high traffic. A national cemetery, section 60. Grave marker for unknown soldier, Vietnam conflict. Third row, 7th stone. Package will be waiting at 1600 hours." Joan ended the call and destroyed the phone, burning the SIM card in the motel bathroom sink. She spent the rest of the day creating what she needed. Documents that would expose Shepard's entire operation, but presented in a way that appeared to come from American intelligence sources rather than a former Soviet operative. At 4 p.m., she retrieved the package from Arlington National Cemetery. Inside was a new identity, $10,000 in cash, and a Belgian-made FN-57 pistol with 2 spare magazines. The GRU took care of its own, even retired assets who'd gone native. She also found something unexpected, a photograph from Prague, 1985. It showed a younger version of herself in Soviet uniform, standing over a kneeling American Marine captain. Shepard's face was clearly visible, tears streaming down his cheeks as he signed a confession. On the back, someone had written, "Insurance policy, use wisely." Joan smiled grimly. Moscow had been watching all along, waiting to see if their deeply embedded asset would ever need activation. They'd kept the evidence of Shepard's betrayal, knowing that someday it might be useful. The next morning's Pentagon briefing was scheduled for 0900 hours. Another routine logistics meeting, nothing that would typically draw attention. But Joan had made sure Captain Lewis would be there, along with every member of the oversight committee. She arrived early, as always, setting up her stenotype machine with methodical precision. She wore her usual forgettable outfit, but today she'd added something, a small pin on her collar, barely noticeable. It was a challenge coin that had been turned into a piece of jewelry, the kind of thing military wives often wore. Nobody would look twice at it. Nobody except someone who knew what to look for. The coin was from Soviet military intelligence, awarded for exceptional service during the Cold War. She'd earned it for Operation Snowfall. General Shepard entered the briefing room at 08:55, his eyes immediately finding Joan. She met his gaze steadily, her fingers never pausing in their warm-up exercises on the stenotype keys. He saw the pin and his face went white. "General," she said pleasantly, "beautiful morning, isn't it? Though not as beautiful as Prague in winter. The snow was particularly lovely in 1985. Shepard's hand moved to his sidearm, an unconscious gesture that Colonel Hayes noticed with alarm. "Sir?" Hayes asked. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Shepard growled, forcing his hand away from his weapon. "Everything's fine." The room filled with officers, Lewis among them. The young captain looked exhausted, having spent the night analyzing the anonymous tips that kept appearing in his secure inbox. Each one led to another piece of evidence, another thread in the web of corruption that seemed to center on General Shepard. Today's briefing was supposed to be about fuel supplies for forward bases. Routine, boring, the kind of meeting where Joan's transcription was the only record anyone would ever check. But she had other plans. As the meeting progressed, Joan began incorporating something new into her transcription. Every time Shepard spoke, she added a notation in the margin. Voice stress analysis indicates deception. It was subtle, something that would only be noticed when the transcript was reviewed later, but it would raise questions. At 09:30, Captain Lewis stood to present his latest findings. He'd discovered that 3 shipments of weapons supposedly destroyed in Yemen had actually been sold to arms dealers in Somalia. The authorization came from Shepard's committee, but this time Lewis had something more. Surveillance footage from a Somali airfield showing U.S. military crates being unloaded. Crates that were supposedly at the bottom of the Red Sea. "This is circumstantial at best," Shepard interrupted. "Those crates could contain anything. Humanitarian supplies, medical equipment." "Stinger missiles," Joan said quietly. Every head in the room turned to her. She had never spoken during a briefing before, not once in 15 years. "I'm sorry?" Lewis asked. Joan looked up from her stenotype machine, meeting Shepard's eyes. "The crates contain FIM-92 Stinger surface-to-air missiles. Serial numbers matching a shipment reported destroyed after a supposed terrorist attack on convoy Delta 77 last March." "How could you possibly know that?" Colonel Hayes demanded. Joan reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. She stood, something she'd never done during a briefing, and walked to the center of the room. Her entire demeanor had changed. The meek secretary was gone, replaced by someone who moved with purpose and authority. "Because I have the shipping manifests," she said, placing the folder on the table. "The real ones, not the forgeries that were uploaded to the system. I also have bank records showing deposits into Iron Security Solutions, corresponding with each shipment. And I have this." She pulled out the photograph from Prague. The room went silent as she placed it in front of Admiral Foster. "That's General Shepard, then Captain Shepard, in Soviet custody in 1985. He's signing a confession detailing the locations of CIA safe houses in Eastern Europe. 12 American operatives died because of that information." Shepard lunged across the table, his hands reaching for Joan's throat. She sidestepped with fluid grace, using his momentum to send him crashing into the wall. When Colonel Hayes moved to help the general, Joan had already positioned herself with her back to the corner, hands raised in a defensive stance that spoke of decades of training. "Don't," she said softly. "I'm not your enemy. He is." Lewis picked up the photograph, his hands shaking. This can't be real." "Check the metadata," Joan replied. "Check the chemical composition of the photograph paper. It's Soviet stock from the 80s. More importantly, check the file number in the corner. It corresponds with CIA records of Operation Snowfall. Files that were classified beyond even your clearance level, Captain, but which I'm sure Admiral Foster can access." Foster was already on her secure phone, barking orders to intelligence staff. Within minutes, she had confirmation. The photograph was authentic. Operation Snowfall had ended with the death of an entire CIA network. Only one survivor, Marcus Shepard, who'd been awarded the Silver Star for maintaining operational security under torture. "You're lying," Shepard snarled from where he had fallen against the wall. "This is a Soviet fabrication." "I was there," Joan interrupted. "I was the one who interrogated you. GRU, Colonel Marina Volkov, though I was only 27 then. You lasted exactly 3 hours before you broke. You gave us everything. Names, locations, operational procedures. You betrayed your entire unit to save your own skin." The silence in the room was deafening. Some of the most powerful military officers in America stood frozen, watching their worldview crumble. After the wall fell, Joan continued, I was burned by my own government. Too many secrets, too much knowledge. I was given a choice, die in a gulag or disappear completely. The CIA helped, ironically enough. They needed a Soviet intelligence officer to verify certain Cold War records. In exchange, I became Joan Miller, invisible stenographer, keeper of secrets, but speaker of none. She turned to Lewis. Everything you need is in that folder, Captain. Financial records, shipping manifests, correspondence with arms dealers. General Shepard has stolen $43 million in military equipment over the past 18 months, selling it to the highest bidder and using the profits to fund his Senate campaign. You're a foreign intelligence operative, Hayes said, her hand moving to her weapon. You're admitting to being a Russian spy. Was, Joan corrected. Was a Russian spy. For the past 15 years, I've been nothing more than what I appeared, a stenographer. I've never passed information to Moscow, never compromised American security. Check my record, check my finances, check everything. You'll find nothing because there is nothing. I left that life behind. Then why reveal yourself now? Admiral Foster asked. Joan looked at Lewis. Because an innocent man was about to be destroyed for uncovering the truth. Because corruption at this level threatens everything I've come to respect about this country. And because, she turned back to Shepard, some sins demand confession. Shepard reached for his sidearm, a desperate move by a desperate man. Joan moved faster than anyone in the room thought possible for a 42-year-old secretary. She crossed the distance in 2 steps, her hand catching his wrist and applying pressure to specific nerve points. The pistol clattered to the floor as Shepard dropped to his knees. His arm twisted at an angle that promised significant pain if he moved. In Moscow, they called me Snegorochka, she said quietly, her accent now fully Russian. The Snow Maiden. I had 47 confirmed kills before I turned 28. I retired undefeated, untouched, and unknown to Western intelligence except as a ghost story. The fact that you're still breathing, General, is a professional courtesy I'm beginning to regret. She released him and stepped back, straightening her simple gray t-shirt. The room full of America's military elite stood frozen, unsure whether to arrest her, thank her, or run. Captain Lewis found his voice first. We need to contact JAG immediately. General Shepard needs to be placed under arrest pending investigation. Agreed, Admiral Foster said, her phone already connecting to military police. Colonel Hayes, you're relieved of duty pending investigation of your involvement. Hayes started to protest, then stopped. The evidence was overwhelming. Her nephew's participation in the attack on Joan's house would surface eventually. Better to cooperate now and hope for leniency. Within minutes, the room filled with military police. Shepard was placed in restraints, his 30-year career ending with the click of handcuffs. As they led him past Joan, he stopped. They'll never let you go free, he hissed. A Soviet colonel on American soil? You'll disappear into a black site before the day is over. Joan smiled, an expression that transformed her face from forgettable to striking. Perhaps. But at least I'll disappear with my honor intact. Can you say the same? As the MPs led Shepard away, Admiral Foster approached Joan. You understand we can't just let you walk away from this. I understand, Joan replied. I have a proposal. Full debriefing, everything I know about Soviet operations during the Cold War. In exchange, witness protection and a quiet retirement. I'm 42, Admiral. I've been at war in one form or another since I was 17. I just want peace. Foster considered this. I'll need to make some calls. You'll be placed in protective custody. Actually, a new voice interrupted from the doorway. She'll be coming with us. 3 men in dark suits entered the room, their bearing screaming federal authority. CIA, Joan recognized immediately. The lead agent, a tall man with prematurely gray hair, showed his credentials to Admiral Foster. Agent Carlson, Special Activities Division. We've been monitoring Mrs. Miller, or should I say Colonel Volkov, for the past 15 years. Joan raised an eyebrow. Have you now? Carlson smiled thinly. You didn't think we'd let a former GRU colonel work in the Pentagon without keeping tabs, did you? You've been under surveillance since the day you arrived. We know about every dead drop you never used, every contact protocol you never activated, every opportunity to commit espionage that you declined. Then you know I've been clean, Joan said. We know you've been dormant, Carlson corrected. There's a difference, but today you've proven something interesting. When pushed, you chose to expose corruption rather than exploit it. That makes you potentially valuable. I'm not going back to intelligence work, Jones said firmly. No one's asking you to. But your knowledge of Soviet-era operations, combined with your proven loyalty to American interests despite your background, makes you unique. We'd like to offer you a deal. Lewis stepped forward. She just exposed massive corruption and saved my career. Whatever deal you're offering better include protection and compensation. Carlson looked at the young JAG officer with something approaching respect. Captain, your defense of an admitted foreign intelligence operative is admirable, if naive. But as it happens, we agree. Mrs. Miller, we'll continue to call you that, will receive full immunity for any activities during her time with Soviet intelligence. In exchange, she'll provide complete debriefings on Cold War operations and serve as a consultant on historical intelligence matters. And Shepard, Joan asked, will face the full consequences of his actions, both current and past. The photograph from Prague alone ensures that. Treason doesn't have a statute of limitations. Joan considered this, then nodded slowly. I accept, but I have conditions. Such as? She looked at Lewis. Captain Lewis receives full credit for uncovering the corruption. My involvement is classified beyond his clearance level. As far as the official record shows, he solved this case through brilliant investigation work. Joan, Lewis started. It's better this way, she interrupted. You have a career ahead of you. Being associated with a foreign intelligence operative, even a retired one, would complicate that unnecessarily. Admiral Foster had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke. There's still the matter of this morning's incident. 4 Marine Force reconnaissance operators were found unconscious in a kitchen in Arlington. They claim they were conducting a training exercise that went wrong, but the injuries suggest otherwise. Joan kept her expression neutral. I wouldn't know anything about that, Admiral. I spent last night at a motel in Bethesda. I have receipts. Foster's lips twitched slightly. I'm sure you do. Agent Carlson checked his watch. We need to move. Mrs. Miller, you'll come with us for initial debriefing. Your personal effects will be collected and searched, standard protocol. Any weapons or intelligence materials will be confiscated. I understand, Joan said. She turned to the room full of officers. Gentlemen, ladies, it's been educational. As she walked toward the door with the CIA agents, Captain Lewis called out, Joan, wait. She paused, looking back. Thank you, he said simply. Joan nodded, then surprised everyone by offering a perfect military salute. Not the awkward gesture of a civilian, but the crisp, precise movement of someone who'd served with distinction. Admiral Foster, after a moment's hesitation, returned the salute. Then Colonel Hayes, despite her impending investigation. One by one, every officer in the room saluted the small woman in the gray t-shirt and combat boots. Joan held the salute for exactly 3 seconds, then dropped her hand and walked out of the room, disappearing into whatever new life the CIA had planned for her. The debriefing facility was exactly what Joan expected. A nondescript building in Langley, underground levels that didn't appear on any blueprint, rooms with no windows and very sophisticated recording equipment. She spent the next 6 hours recounting events she hadn't thought about in decades, operations that existed only in the memories of those who'd survived them. Agent Carlson proved to be a skilled interrogator, though he preferred the term debriefer. He asked probing questions but never pushed too hard, understanding that Joan's cooperation was voluntary and valuable. Tell me about Prague, he said during hour 4. Joan sipped the surprisingly good coffee they had provided. Prague was a lesson in the cost of ideology. We believed we were protecting the Soviet Union from Western aggression. You believed you were defending freedom from communist oppression. Both sides were willing to sacrifice anything, anyone, for those beliefs. And Shepard? Shepard was weak, not physically. He could have withstood torture for days. But psychologically, he was fragile. He'd built his entire identity on being a Marine, a warrior, untouchable. When that identity cracked, he shattered completely. You could have killed him. Joan nodded. Standard protocol would have been execution after interrogation. But I saw something useful in him. A man who'd betrayed everything once would do it again if properly motivated. So I let him live, knowing that someday, somehow, his weakness would surface again. You played a long game, the longest. 37 years from that room in Prague to this room in Langley, though I'll admit, I never expected to be the one to expose him. I thought his own corruption would eventually destroy him without my intervention. What changed? Joan set down her coffee cup. Captain Lewis, an honest man trying to do the right thing in a system designed to protect the corrupt. He reminded me of the American operatives who died because of Shepard's betrayal. They deserve justice, even if it came decades late. Carlson made notes on his tablet. Your file says you have no family, no connections to Russia anymore. My parents died in a gulag when I was 17. My recruitment into GRU was their way of keeping me alive. Serve the state or join my parents. I chose survival. I've been choosing survival ever since. And now? Joan looked at the sterile walls of the interrogation room. Now I choose peace. I've killed for ideology, for orders, for survival. I've never killed for myself, for personal gain or satisfaction. That's the only thing that lets me sleep at night. The FBI found something interesting in Shepard's house, Carlson said, changing the subject. He pulled out a tablet, showing Joan a photograph. A journal dating back to 1985. He wrote about Prague, about you. He's been looking for you ever since. Joan examined the image. Shepard's handwriting, cramped and urgent, filling page after page with theories about her identity, her potential whereabouts, an obsession that had consumed him for decades. He knew I was alive, she said. Part of him always knew. That's why he reacted so strongly to my shooting display. He recognized something, a ghost from his past. He wrote that you could have extracted more information from him, that you stopped the interrogation early. Why? Joan was quiet for a moment, remembering. Because he'd given me everything that mattered. Pushing further would have been cruelty for its own sake. I was a professional interrogator, not a sadist. The distinction mattered to me, even then. It's why you're here instead of a black site, Carlson admitted. Your record shows remarkable restraint for someone in your position. 47 confirmed kills, but each one was operational necessity, never personal. That kind of discipline is rare. Is that supposed to absolve me? No. But it explains why we're willing to make a deal. You were a soldier fighting a war, not a terrorist or a criminal. The war ended, and you adapted. That's more than can be said for some on both sides. The debriefing continued until well past midnight. Joan provided details about Soviet operations, training methods, personnel she'd known who might still be active. It was strange, she thought, betraying the country that had made her what she was. But that country didn't exist anymore, and hadn't for 30 years. Finally, Carlson closed his tablet. That's enough for today. We'll continue tomorrow, but I think we have what we need to verify your value to our historical intelligence program. And then? Then you disappear again. New identity, new location, monthly check-ins to ensure you're not reactivated by Moscow. It's not exactly freedom, but it's not prison either. Joan stood, stretching muscles that had been still too long. It's more than I expected when I woke up this morning. As Carlson led her to the secure quarters where she'd spend the night, he asked one final question. Do you regret it, revealing yourself to save Lewis? Joan considered this. I've done many things I regret, Agent Carlson. This isn't one of them. The next morning brought news that traveled through the Pentagon like wildfire. General Marcus Iron Shepard had been formally charged with treason, corruption, and conspiracy to defraud the United States military. The evidence was overwhelming, ironclad, undeniable, but the bigger shock came from the details that emerged about Prague. Somehow, nobody knew exactly how, the full story of Operation Snowfall had been leaked to military prosecutors. 12 names, 12 American operatives who'd died because one man broke under interrogation. Their families, who'd spent 37 years believing their loved ones died as heroes in a botched operation, learned the truth about their betrayal. Captain Lewis found himself at the center of a media storm he hadn't anticipated. The young JAG officer who had exposed corruption at the highest levels of the Marine Corps became an overnight sensation. He handled it with characteristic professionalism, crediting his team and the anonymous sources who'd provided crucial information. Only Lewis knew about the final message he'd received from Joan, delivered through a secure channel that deleted itself after reading. The truth is its own reward. Make them remember that. In a comfortable but unremarkable house in Oregon, 1,500 miles from Washington, Joan Miller, now Jennifer Martin, watched the news coverage while tending to her garden. The CIA had been efficient in creating her new life. A complete identity, a modest pension, neighbors who asked no questions about the quiet woman who had moved in over the weekend. She'd kept one thing from her old life, the orchid from her Pentagon desk. It sat on her kitchen windowsill, still thriving despite the change in environment. Like her, it had adapted to circumstances beyond its control. The encrypted phone hidden in her flower canister hadn't rung since she'd arrived. She knew it would eventually. The CIA would have more questions, need more information about operations she'd rather forget. But for now, they were letting her rest, letting her pretend to be nobody special. Her neighbor, an elderly veteran named Bill, waved from across the fence. "Beautiful morning, Jennifer." "Yes," she agreed, her accent now perfectly Pacific Northwest neutral. "It certainly is." Bill had been force recon in Vietnam. She'd identified that from his tattoos and the way he moved despite his age. He probably had stories, probably had secrets of his own. But here, in this small Oregon town, everyone's past was their own business. That afternoon, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a single item, a chess piece, a white queen, carved from what looked like bone. She recognized it immediately. It had sat on her desk in Moscow 37 years ago, a gift from her handler when she'd made colonel. There was no note, but the message was clear. Moscow knew where she was, knew her new identity. They were watching, waiting to see if their snow maiden would ever thaw, ever return to the game. Joan placed the queen on her mantle, where she could see it from her reading chair, a reminder of who she'd been and a warning about who might still want her to be. That evening, she did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She cooked a Russian meal, borscht, pelmeni, black bread. The familiar smells filled her kitchen, bringing back memories of her grandmother's apartment in Leningrad, before everything changed, before she became a weapon shaped by ideology. As she ate alone at her small table, she thought about Captain Lewis, probably being briefed right now on his new position in the Pentagon's Reformed Oversight Committee. She thought about General Shepard, sitting in a military prison cell, his lifetime of lies finally catching up with him. She thought about the families of those 12 operatives, finally knowing the truth about how their loved ones died. Joan checked her app for veterans insurance benefits on her phone. The CIA had insisted she maintain a complete false identity, including normal American concerns. The premium platinum package showed coverage up to $500,000, a safety net she'd hopefully never need, but appreciated having. The modern world required such mundane considerations, even for retired intelligence operatives. The chess piece seemed to watch her from the mantel as Joan finished her Russian dinner. She washed the dishes methodically, each movement precise and economical, habits that would never leave her even in this peaceful Oregon town. Outside, rain began to fall, that gentle Pacific Northwest drizzle that could last for days. Her secure phone buzzed, not the CIA line, but the regular cell phone that came with her Jennifer Martin identity. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was Washington, D.C. "Hello?" she answered, letting a slight Oregon accent color her voice. "Joan." The voice was familiar. Captain Lewis, though she supposed he was Major Lewis now, given the recent promotion. "I'm sorry. I mean Jennifer. The agency gave me your number. I hope you don't mind." She walked to her living room window, watching the rain streak the glass. "It's all right, Captain. Is everything well?" "Major now, actually. Thanks to you." There was a pause. "I wanted you to know that Shepard's trial starts next week. Military tribunal, closed to the public, but they'll need testimony. The prosecutors want to know if you'd be willing—" "I can't," Joan interrupted gently. "My agreement with the agency precludes any public appearances, even in closed sessions. My debriefings are being provided as sealed depositions." "I understand. I just thought you deserve to see him face justice." Joan smiled slightly. "Justice isn't always about watching the guilty fall, Major. Sometimes it's about ensuring the innocent rise. You're heading the new Oversight Committee. That's justice enough for me." "There's something else," Lewis said, his voice dropping. "During the investigation, we found more operations Shepard was involved in. Not just the weapons trafficking. He was selling intelligence, Joan. Operational plans, deployment schedules, even the identities of intelligence assets in the field." Joan's hand tightened on the phone. "How long?" "At least 5 years, maybe longer. The CIA is tracking down compromised operations now, but the damage—" He trailed off. 3 operatives in Syria are missing. Their covers were blown 6 months ago. The timing matches one of Shepard's transactions. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows. Joan closed her eyes, seeing faces from her past. Operatives she'd known on both sides who died because someone betrayed them for money. "He never changed," she said quietly. "From Prague to now, he's always been willing to sell lives for his own benefit." The prosecutors want to add these charges to the trial, but they need more evidence. The financial trails are complex, hidden behind dozens of shell companies. We know he did it, but proving it in court— "Check the Patterson Trust," Joan said, surprising herself with the offer of help. "It's a Cayman Islands shell that routes through Luxembourg before hitting Swiss accounts. Shepard mentioned it once during a briefing about terrorist financing. He was too knowledgeable about its structure for someone who had only read about it in reports." Lewis was silent for a moment, probably writing this down. "How do you remember something like that?" "I remember everything, Major. Every word spoken in every briefing I transcribed. It's a gift and a curse. Joan, Jennifer, thank you for everything." After the call ended, Joan stood at her window for a long time, watching the rain wash the world clean. Her new life was supposed to be peaceful, removed from the shadow games she'd played for so long. But shadows, she was learning, had a way of finding you no matter how far you ran. 3 days later, the news broke. The Patterson Trust investigation had uncovered a massive intelligence selling operation that made the weapons trafficking look like a minor crime. General Shepard wasn't just corrupt, he was one of the most damaging traitors in American military history. Joan watched the coverage from her local coffee shop, just another retiree following the news. The owner, a cheerful woman named Sarah, shook her head at the television. "Can you believe it?" Sarah asked. "A general selling out his own country? What kind of person does that?" "Someone who values themselves more than anything else," Joan replied, sipping her tea. "You know, you sound like you've got experience with that kind of thing," Sarah observed. "Were you military?" "Secretary," Joan said with a small smile. "I was a secretary. You'd be amazed what you learn just by listening and typing." That afternoon, she received another package. This one came through official CIA channels, delivered by an agent who checked her identification twice before handing it over. Inside was a medal she didn't recognize, and a letter from Admiral Foster. "Ms. Martin," the letter read, "while we cannot publicly acknowledge your service, please accept this Intelligence Star for exceptional contributions to national security. Your actions prevented immeasurable damage to ongoing operations and saved the lives of intelligence officers in the field. A grateful nation thanks you, even if that gratitude must remain classified." Joan held the medal up to the light. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a silver star with a wreath around it. She would never be able to wear it publicly, never be able to tell anyone what it was for. But it was hers, earned through sacrifice and courage that most people would never understand. She placed it in a drawer next to the white queen chess piece, 2 symbols of different lives that had somehow become the same life. That evening, Bill from next door invited her over for dinner. His wife Martha had made pot roast, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. Joan found herself at their dinner table, listening to stories about grandchildren and local politics, pretending to be someone who'd never held a rifle, never extracted secrets from desperate men, never lived multiple lives in multiple languages. "You know," Bill said over dessert, "there's something about you, Jennifer. Can't quite place it, but you remind me of some folks I knew in the service. The quiet professionals, we called them." Martha elbowed him. "Bill, don't interrogate our neighbor." "It's all right," Joan said. "I take it as a compliment, though I was never military myself. Just adjacent to it, you might say." Bill nodded slowly, and she could see him filing that information away. Force recon operators were trained to read between lines, even in retirement. As she walked home that night, Joan noticed a car parked outside her house that hadn't been there before. Oregon plates, but too clean for the rainy weather. The driver was reading a newspaper, but his eyes tracked her movement in the reflection of his side mirror. She entered her house normally, then immediately moved to her kitchen window to observe. The car didn't move for 15 minutes, then slowly pulled away. She memorized the plate number and called her CIA handler. "We're aware," Carlson said when he answered. "Russian intelligence. They're not there to harm you, just to remind you they know where you are. And you're allowing this? For now, they haven't made any aggressive moves, and frankly, having them watch you gives us a chance to watch them. "You're bait, Jennifer, whether you like it or not." "I've been bait before," she replied. "It rarely ends well for the fish or the fisherman." The next morning brought disturbing news. One of the missing CIA operatives in Syria had been found dead, executed after months of torture. His real name would never be released, but Joan recognized the operational details. He'd been running assets in Damascus, gathering intelligence on weapons shipments. Shepard had sold his identity for $30,000. She stood in her garden, pulling weeds with perhaps more force than necessary. Each plant she removed reminded her of the corruption she'd helped uproot. But like weeds, corruption always grew back somewhere else. "Rough morning?" Bill's voice came from over the fence. "Just thinking about the news," she said, straightening up. "That general's trial. The people who died because of what he did." Bill was quiet for a moment. "You know, in Vietnam, we had a saying. The worst enemy isn't the one pointing a gun at you. It's the one wearing your uniform, standing behind you, waiting for the right moment to strike." "That's very true," Joan agreed. "Speaking of which," Bill continued, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, "you had a visitor yesterday. Drove by real slow, took some pictures of your house. Want me to have some of my old buddies look into it?" Joan smiled. "That's kind, Bill, but I'm sure it's nothing. Probably real estate people. The market's been active lately." "Uh-huh." Bill clearly didn't believe her, but he respected the deflection. "Well, you need anything, Martha and I are right here." As he walked away, Joan reflected on the strange nature of her new life. Surrounded by watchers, CIA, Russian intelligence, and now apparently the neighborhood watch in the form of a suspicious force recon veteran. That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went to a shooting range. The Cascade Rifle Club was a modest facility, mostly used by hunters preparing for deer season. Joan rented a lane and a basic Remington 700, the kind of rifle any hunter might use. She'd deliberately chosen the busiest time, wanting to blend into the crowd. But the moment she took her stance, she knew she'd made a mistake. Her body fell into perfect position without thought, the rifle becoming an extension of her will. The first shot hit dead center at 200 yards. So did the second. And the third. "Holy cow," a young man in the next lane exclaimed. "Lady, you're incredible. You compete professionally?" "Just lucky," Joan said, deliberately pulling her next shot slightly off center. "Beginner's luck." But the rangemaster, a grizzled former Army sergeant named Tom, was watching her with knowing eyes. When she went to return the rifle, he leaned in close. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, and I don't want to know, but that wasn't luck, and we both know it. You're welcome here anytime, no questions asked. Sometimes people need to stay sharp, even in retirement." Joan nodded her thanks and left quickly. She'd been careless, letting muscle memory override caution. It wouldn't happen again. When she got home, there was a red sedan parked across from her house. Different from yesterday's surveillance, this one wasn't trying to hide. The driver, a woman with short blonde hair, got out as Joan approached. "Mrs. Martin, Agent Catherine Silva, CIA. Agent Carlson asked me to check in." Joan evaluated her quickly. Late 30s, former military from her bearing, probably special operations before joining the agency. "Coffee?" Inside, Silva got straight to the point. "The Shepard trial is causing ripples. Other intelligence services are asking questions about how we uncovered everything so quickly. The Russians in particular are very interested." "They think you turned one of theirs," Joan said. It wasn't a question. "Exactly. Moscow is conducting an internal review of all former GRU and KGB operatives who went dark after the Cold War. You're on that list." Joan poured the coffee steadily, her hands perfectly still. And we need to know if you've had any contact. Any attempts to reactivate you, bring you back in, use you against us." "There was the chess piece," Joan said. "A white queen from my old desk in Moscow. No note, but the message was clear." Silva pulled out a tablet, making notes. "We know about that. What we don't know is whether it was a warning or an invitation." "Both," Joan replied. "Moscow doesn't do single-purpose operations. They're telling me they know where I am, reminding me who I was, and leaving the door open in case I want to return." "Do you want to return?" Joan looked at the agent over her coffee cup. "Agent Silva, I spent 25 years as a Soviet intelligence officer and 15 years as an American stenographer. In all that time, I learned one truth. Countries are temporary, but choices are forever. I made my choice when I saved Major Lewis. There's no going back from that." Silva studied her for a moment, then nodded. we're increasing surveillance on your house. Discreet but present. If Moscow makes a move—" "They won't," Joan interrupted. "Not yet. They're patient. They'll wait to see how the Shepard trial plays out, whether I'm called to testify, whether my real identity becomes public. Then they'll decide if I'm an asset or a liability." After Silva left, Joan went through her evening routine, acutely aware of all the eyes watching her. CIA, Russians, probably Bill from next door with his binoculars. She was a living crossroads of the Cold War, a reminder that some battles never really ended. The secure phone rang at exactly 9 p.m. Carlson. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Shepard's lawyer is pushing for discovery of all evidence sources. If the judge agrees, your depositions could become part of the record." "Under what name?" "That's the issue. The depositions are attributed to a classified source. But Shepard knows who you are. If he reveals that in court, claims the evidence came from a Soviet spy, the case could be compromised," Joan finished. "His lawyer could argue the evidence is tainted, that I'm an unreliable witness with ulterior motives." "Exactly. We need you to consider something. A video deposition, face obscured, voice altered, but your words, your testimony, it would be classified at the highest levels, seen only by the tribunal judges." Joan walked to her window, looking out at the dark street. Somewhere out there, multiple surveillance teams were watching her house. "If I do this, Moscow will know I've fully turned. There'll be no ambiguity left." "I understand, but without your testimony, Shepard might walk on the most serious charges. The weapons trafficking will stick, but the treason, the sale of intelligence, the Prague incident, all of that depends on your evidence." She thought about the CIA operative who died in Syria, tortured for months because Shepard sold his identity. She thought about the 12 operatives who died in Prague because Shepard broke. She thought about Major Lewis, who had risked everything to expose the truth. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow. We'll extract you tonight, conduct the deposition at a secure facility, and have you back home by evening. Your neighbors will think you went shopping in Portland." Joan agreed and began to pack a small bag. As she did, she noticed the White Queen on her mantle seemed to glow in the lamplight, a reminder of choices made and unmade. At 11 p.m., a nondescript van pulled into her driveway. Agent Silva was driving, with 2 other operatives she didn't recognize. They drove in silence through the Oregon night, taking seemingly random turns to shake any surveillance. The facility was underground, accessed through what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. Joan was led through multiple security checkpoints to a sterile room with recording equipment that looked like it belonged in a Hollywood studio. "We'll obscure your face and alter your voice," the technician explained. "But we need your exact words, your specific memories. The judges need to feel the truth of what you are saying." Joan sat in the designated chair, bright lights making her nothing more than a silhouette on camera. She could see her reflection in the lens, a shadow person telling shadow stories. "State your name for the record," a voice said from behind the camera. "My name is Joan Miller," she began, then paused. "But that is not the name I was born with. I was born Marina Volkov in Leningrad in 1958. I was recruited into the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, at age 17. I achieved the rank of colonel by age 27, one of the youngest in the service's history." For the next 6 hours, she spoke. She detailed Operation Snowfall, the interrogation of Marcus Shepard, his betrayal of his unit. She provided dates, times, locations, details that only someone who was there could know. She described Shepard's tears as he signed the confession, the names he gave up, the exact positions of safe houses he revealed. "He didn't just break," she said, her altered voice carrying across the years. "He shattered. He offered information I hadn't even asked for, trying to buy his life with his brother's blood. I've interrogated many people, broken trained operatives and hardened soldiers, but I've never seen someone betray so completely, so eagerly." She went on to detail her years in the Pentagon, the patterns she'd observed in Shepard's behavior, the gradual realization that his corruption went beyond mere greed. "He was addicted to betrayal," she explained. "It started in Prague when he discovered he could survive by selling others. That pattern never stopped. He just found new things to sell, new people to betray. When it was over, she felt drained, empty, as if she'd poured decades of secrets into that camera and had nothing left." Silva drove her home in the pre-dawn darkness, the Oregon forest sliding past like memories. "You did the right thing," Silva said as they pulled into Joan's driveway. Did I? Joan asked. I just betrayed every oath I ever took to my homeland. Your homeland doesn't exist anymore, Silva reminded her. The Soviet Union died 30 years ago. You're not betraying anything except a ghost. Joan entered her house as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She made tea and sat at her kitchen table, watching the light creep across her garden. The white queen on the mantel caught the first rays, seeming to pulse with accusation. Her regular phone rang. Bill from next door. Saw you get home, he said. Everything all right? Fine, Joan replied. Early morning shopping in Portland. Wanted to beat the traffic. Uh-huh. He clearly didn't believe her, but wouldn't push. Martha's making pancakes if you want to come over. Thank you, but I need to rest. After hanging up, Joan noticed an email on her laptop, sent to her Jennifer Martin account from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line was in Russian, "We need to talk." She opened it carefully, running it through multiple security protocols first. Inside was a single line of text and a phone number. Your cousin from Moscow misses you. She'd love to catch up. Joan deleted the email, but she memorized the number. Moscow was making its move, sooner than expected. Her testimony must have leaked, or at least the fact that she'd given it. She called Carlson immediately. They've made contact. We saw the email. Don't respond yet. Let them wonder. They won't wait long. If I don't respond within 48 hours, they'll either write me off or take direct action. Then we have 48 hours to prepare. There's something else, Joan. Shepard's lawyer filed a motion this morning. He wants to call you as a witness. He can't. My identity is classified. He's not asking for Joan Miller. He's asking for Marina Volkov. Somehow, he knows who you really are. Joan felt the walls of her carefully constructed new life beginning to crack. Shepard told him. Probably. The question is, what do we do about it? If the tribunal denies the motion, it looks like we're hiding something. If they grant it, I become public. Every intelligence service in the world will know Marina Volkov is alive and in America. She stood at her kitchen window, watching Bill work in his garden. Normal life, normal problems, normal people, everything she'd never be. I need to think, she said. You have 24 hours before the judge rules on the motion. After ending the call, Joan did the only thing that made sense. She went for a walk. The Oregon forest trails were peaceful, filled with bird songs and the rustle of small animals. She walked for miles, her mind cycling through possibilities, probabilities, outcomes. Every path led to exposure, danger, the end of Jennifer Martin's quiet life. When she returned home, there was a package on her doorstep. No delivery truck had come while she was gone, which meant it had been placed there by someone who'd been watching, waiting for her to leave. Inside was a photograph of her from the Pentagon shooting range 3 days ago, taken with a telephoto lens. Her perfect stance, the rifle natural in her hands. On the back, someone had written in Russian, "The snow maiden never melts, she only hibernates." Joan burned the photograph in her sink, watching her image curl and blacken. Then she made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. She called the number from the email. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered in Russian. Marina, it's been too long. Joan recognized the voice. Katya Petrova, her former handler, now probably running Western operations for the GRU. I go by Jennifer now, Joan replied in English. Names change, people don't. Katya switched to English as well, her accent thick with amusement. We've been watching your performance, very impressive, taking down an American general to protect your cover. That's not what happened, isn't it? You've spent 15 years as a perfect sleeper, and when threatened with exposure, you eliminated the threat. Textbook tradecraft. Joan walked to her living room, staring at the White Queen. What do you want, Katya? To offer you a choice. Testify at the trial, become publicly known as Marina Volkov, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or disappear tonight. We have an extraction team ready. You'll be in Moscow by morning, welcomed home as a hero. And if I refuse both options, there was a pause. Then you're on your own, Marina. No protection from us. And once your testimony becomes public, no protection from the Americans either. You'll be a woman without a country, hunted by all, trusted by none. Joan looked at her legal services card on the table, a reminder of the mundane life she'd built. Free consultation for military legal matters, it advertised. Such simple problems compared to hers. I need time, Joan said. You have until midnight. After that, the offer expires, and you become a problem to be solved rather than an asset to be recovered. The line went dead. Joan set down the phone and made another cup of tea, her hands perfectly steady despite the ultimatum she'd just received. She had 6 hours to decide between betraying her new country, destroying her old identity, or disappearing into a shadow world where both sides would hunt her. She called Lewis. "Major, I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to ask why." "Joan, what's wrong?" "Tomorrow at the trial, if Shepard's lawyer asks about Marina Volkov, I need you to say you've never heard that name. Can you do that?" There was a long pause. "Are you in danger?" "I'm always in danger, Major, but right now I need to know if you can lie under oath to protect someone who saved your career." Joan, I'm a JAG officer. I took an oath. We all took oaths, Major. Sometimes they conflict. I'm not asking you to compromise your integrity. I'm asking you to protect a truth that's bigger than the facts." Lewis was quiet for so long she thought he'd hung up. Then, "I've never heard of Marina Volkov. Is there anything else I haven't heard of?" "Thank you," she said softly, and ended the call. At 11:30 p.m., Joan stood in her kitchen, a small bag packed with essentials at her feet. The White Queen was in her pocket, the CIA medal left on the table with a note for Carlson. She'd made her choice. The phone rang, not the Moscow number, but Carlson. "We know about the ultimatum," he said. "We're prepared to extract you, place you in witness protection, so deep even Moscow won't find you. And spend my life running? Spend your life alive," he corrected. "Joan, Marina, whoever you are, you don't owe anyone anything. You've given enough. Let us protect you." She looked out of her window at Bill's house. The old Marine was on his porch despite the late hour, cleaning a rifle with practiced ease. He looked up, caught her eye through the window, and raised his hand in a small salute. "I've lived many lives," Joan said. "A Soviet weapon, an American shadow, and now something else. I think it's time I chose my own path." "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, Joan walked outside, leaving her phone on the counter still connected to Carlson. She crossed the yard to Bill's house, climbing his porch steps with measured calm. "Can't sleep?" Bill asked, not looking up from his rifle. "Bill, I need you to know something. In about 5 minutes, several cars are going to arrive at my house. There might be some commotion." Bill set down his rifle, his eyes sharp. "You in trouble, Jennifer?" "My name isn't Jennifer," she said simply. "And yes, I'm in trouble, but it's trouble I chose." Bill stood slowly. "Need help?" She smiled. "Just remember that sometimes the best stories are the ones we never tell." As she walked back to her house, she could hear vehicles approaching, engines running quiet but not silent. She stood in her doorway, hands visible and empty, as 3 black SUVs pulled up. Russians from one direction, CIA from another, all converging on a small house in Oregon where a woman stood waiting. Katya stepped out of the lead Russian vehicle, elegant in a long coat despite the circumstances. Carlson emerged from the CIA convoy, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Gentlemen, ladies," Joan called out, her voice carrying clearly in the night air, "before anyone does anything irreversible, I have a proposition." Both groups paused, weapons not quite drawn but ready. Joan reached into her pocket and pulled out the White Queen, holding it up so everyone could see it in the porch light. "This chess piece represents who I was. Marina Volkov, GRU Colonel, the Snow Maiden. That person died in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell." She set the piece on her porch railing and pulled out the CIA medal. "This represents who I became. Joan Miller, keeper of secrets, protector of truth. That person died yesterday when she gave testimony against General Shepard." She placed the medal next to the chess piece. "So the question is, who am I now? And more importantly, who do I choose to be?" Katya took a step forward. "Marina, you're being dramatic. Come home." "I am home," Joan replied. "This is my home. These are my neighbors. This is my life." "The Americans will never trust you," Katya said. "You will always be a former enemy to them." "And to you, I'll always be a potential traitor," Joan countered. "Someone who chose America over Mother Russia." Carlson spoke up. "Joan, we can protect you. You don't have to go with them." "I'm not going with anyone," Joan said. She pulled out a document from her jacket, holding it up. "This is my testimony, notarized and witnessed, detailing everything about Prague, about Shepard, about my time in both Soviet and American intelligence. I've sent copies to the Judge Advocate General, the CIA, the FBI, and yes, even to Moscow. Both groups tensed, unsure where this was going. I'm done being a secret, Joan continued. Tomorrow I'll testify publicly at Shepard's trial. I'll tell the world who I was, what I did, and why I chose to expose him. After that, I'll submit to whatever investigations, hearings, or trials either government wants to conduct. That's suicide, Katya said sharply. Every enemy you've ever made will know where to find you. Perhaps it's the only way to truly be free. Secrets are chains, Katya. I've worn them for 40 years. It's time to break them. She turned to Carlson. Agent Carlson, I'll need protective custody tonight and transportation to the trial tomorrow. After I testify, we can discuss my future, if I have one. Then to Katya. Tell Moscow that Marina Volkov is dead. She died doing what she always did, completing her mission. My mission was to serve my country. First the Soviet Union, then, in a different way, America. Tomorrow, I serve the truth. Katya stood very still for a long moment, then spoke in Russian. You know what this means. There's no protection, no extraction, no going back. I know, Joan replied in Russian, but there's also no more running, no more lying, no more being someone else's weapon. Katya turned and walked back to her vehicle. Before getting in, she called out, The snow maiden finally melted. I hope you find what you're looking for in the water that remains. The Russian vehicles pulled away, disappearing into the Oregon night. Carlson approached slowly, his team maintaining overwatch positions. Joan, are you sure about this? No, she admitted, but I'm tired of being sure. Certainty is what made me a killer. Maybe uncertainty will make me human. Bill had come out onto his porch, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. Everything all right over there, Jennifer? It will be, Bill, she called back. One way or another, it will be. Carlson's team secured her house while she packed properly for what might be her last night in Oregon. As they drove away, Joan looked back at the small house where Jennifer Martin had lived such a quiet life. Tomorrow, that woman would cease to exist, replaced by someone who was neither Marina Volkov nor Joan Miller, but something new, a person defined by choices rather than orders. The federal courthouse in Washington was a fortress of marble and justice, its steps worn by decades of people seeking truth. Joan stood at the bottom of those steps at 8 a.m., wearing a simple black suit that could have belonged to any government employee. Carlson stood beside her, along with a discreet security detail. The last chance to change your mind, he offered. The only thing I'd change is the past, Joan replied, and that's the one thing nobody can do. Inside, the military tribunal was already in session. General Shepard sat at the defense table, his uniform stripped of insignia, his face gaunt from months in military detention. When Joan entered, his eyes locked onto hers with pure hatred. Your Honor, Shepard's lawyer stood, the defense calls Marina Volkov to the stand. There was confusion in the gallery. The prosecutor started to object that no such witness was on the list. Joan stood. Your Honor, Marina Volkov is present and willing to testify. The judge, a stern admiral with 40 years of service, studied her carefully. Approached the bench. At the bench, Joan spoke quietly but clearly. Your Honor, my legal name is Joan Miller, but I was born Marina Volkov. I'm prepared to testify under oath about all matters relevant to this case. The judge reviewed documents that Carlson had provided, his expression growing more grave with each page. Finally, he nodded. The witness will be sworn in. Joan took the stand, placing her hand on the Bible. The irony wasn't lost on her, swearing to tell the truth after a lifetime of lies. State your name for the record. My name is Joan Miller. I was born Marina Volkov in Leningrad in 1958. I served as a colonel in Soviet military intelligence until 1991. For the past 15 years, I have worked as a stenographer at the Pentagon. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The prosecutor looked stunned. Shepard's lawyer smiled like he'd won the lottery. Ms. Volkov, the defense attorney began, are you currently an agent of Russian intelligence? No. But you were? Yes. And you interrogated General Shepard in Prague in 1985? Then Captain Shepard? Yes. Using what methods? Joan met Shepard's eyes. Psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, and the threat of execution. Standard Soviet interrogation techniques of the era. And under this duress, Captain Shepard provided information? He provided everything, Joan said clearly. Unit positions, agent names, safe house locations, communication protocols, planned operations. He gave us information we hadn't even asked for. The defense attorney's smile faltered. This wasn't going as expected. But surely, under such extreme pressure, I've interrogated 43 people in my career, Joan interrupted. Trained intelligence officers, hardened soldiers, committed ideologues. Most resisted for days, some for weeks. Captain Shepard lasted 3 hours. She pulled out a document from her jacket. This is his signed confession, in his handwriting, listing the 12 operatives whose positions he revealed. Those 12 people died because of this information. Objection, the defense attorney said. That document could be a forgery. I had it authenticated yesterday, the prosecutor interrupted, standing, by the CIA's leading document analysis team. It's genuine. The judge took the document, reading it slowly. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of paper rustling. Ms. Volkov, the judge said finally, why didn't you kill Captain Shepard after the interrogation? Joan considered her answer carefully. Because I saw something in him that would be more useful alive. A man who would betray his brothers once would do it again. I believed that eventually his nature would surface and he would destroy himself more thoroughly than a bullet ever could. And you were right, the judge observed. Unfortunately, yes. The prosecutor stood. Ms. Volkov, or should I say Ms. Miller, why come forward now? Why risk your life to testify? Joan looked at Major Lewis in the gallery, then at the families of the operatives who died because of Shepard's betrayals, both past and present. Because truth has a weight, she said. You can carry it for a while, but eventually it becomes too heavy to bear alone. Captain Shepard has spent 37 years pretending to be a hero while knowing he was a traitor. I've spent 15 years pretending to be nobody while knowing I could expose him. Today, we both stopped pretending. Your witness, the prosecutor said to the defense attorney, who looked like he'd swallowed something sour. The cross-examination was brutal. The defense attorney tried every angle, that Joan was still a Russian agent, that she'd fabricated evidence, that she'd tortured Shepard into a false confession. But each attack fell flat against the weight of documentation, the authentication reports, and Joan's calm, detailed responses. Finally, Shepard himself stood up, ignoring his lawyer's attempts to stop him. You destroyed my life, he shouted at Joan. You tortured me, broke me, and now you sit there acting righteous? You're a killer, a Soviet killer. Joan nodded. Yes, I was. 47 confirmed kills in service to a country that no longer exists. But I never betrayed my comrades. I never sold their lives for money or career advancement. Can you say the same, General? Shepard lunged toward the witness stand, but the bailiffs restrained him. As they dragged him back to his seat, he screamed, She should be the one on trial! She's the enemy! No, Joan said quietly, but her voice carried throughout the courtroom. The enemy is the person who betrays trust, who sells honor for profit, who values themselves above all others. I've been many things, General, but I've never been that. The judge called for order, then asked Joan one final question. Ms. Miller, what will you do now? Your testimony makes you a target for multiple intelligence services. Joan stood, smoothing her simple black suit. Your Honor, I'll do what I've always done. I'll survive. But for the first time in my life, I'll survive as myself, not as someone's weapon or someone's secret. As she stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom was silent. She walked past Shepard, who couldn't meet her eyes, past the prosecutor who nodded respectfully, past Major Lewis who mouthed, "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, media had gathered, somehow alerted to the drama inside. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Joan walked through them like they were ghosts. Carlson's team formed a protective barrier, moving her to a waiting vehicle. Where to now? Carlson asked as they pulled away. Somewhere quiet, Joan said. Somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not being someone else. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down. General Marcus Shepard, guilty on all counts. Treason, espionage, corruption, conspiracy. Lifetime imprisonment without possibility of parole. The media called it the trial of the century, a Cold War ghost story come to life. Joan watched the coverage from a safe house in Maine, a small cottage on the coast where the sound of waves provided constant background music. The CIA had offered her multiple options: deep cover in another country, a new identity and witness protection, even a consulting position with the agency. She'd refused them all, choosing instead this temporary refuge while she decided what came next. Lewis visited on a gray Thursday afternoon, bringing coffee and news from Washington. "The Shepard's appealing, but it won't go anywhere," he said. "Your testimony was devastating. The photographs, the documents, the detail, it's airtight." "Good," Joan said, looking out at the ocean. "What about the families, the ones who lost people in Prague? They're filing civil suits against Shepard's estate. He won't have a penny left when they're done." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching seabirds dive for fish. "I never thanked you properly," Lewis said finally. "You saved my career, my life, really. Why?" Joan turned from the window. "Because you reminded me of them, the 12 who died in Prague, young, idealistic, believing in something greater than themselves. I couldn't save them, but I could save you. What will you do now?" She pulled out a letter she had received that morning, postmarked from Oregon. It was from Bill, her former neighbor. "Jennifer," it read, though he knew that wasn't her name, "Martha and I wanted you to know you're welcome back any time. We don't care who you were. We care who you are. A good neighbor who makes excellent tea and terrible jokes about her garden. The house is still empty. The orchid you left is thriving. Come home when you're ready." Joan smiled, folding the letter carefully. "I think I might try something revolutionary, Major. I might try being normal." Lewis laughed. "I don't think you know how." "No," Joan agreed, "but I'm willing to learn." That evening, Joan received one final visitor. Katya Petrova, her old handler, stood at her door like a ghost from the past. "May I come in?" Katya asked in Russian. Joan let her in, making tea while Katya surveyed the modest safe house. "Moscow is confused," Katya said. "You exposed yourself, destroyed your cover. For what? To put one American general in prison?" "For the truth," Joan replied. "Something we were never allowed to value in our work." Katya accepted the tea, sipping it thoughtfully. "You know they'll never stop watching you. Both sides. You're a living reminder of the Cold War, of all the secrets still buried." "Let them watch," Joan said. "I have no more secrets." "Everyone has secrets, Marina." "Marina is dead," Joan said firmly. "She died in that courtroom when she told the truth. I'm still deciding who to be next." Katya stood to leave, then paused at the door. "There's something you should know. The Berlin files Shepard sold. We bought them through intermediaries. Operations you were part of, agents you handled. That information is now in play." Joan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Maine weather. "Who else knows?" "Everyone who matters. Be careful, Marina, Joan, whoever you are. The past has a way of refusing to stay buried." After Katya left, Joan stood at her window, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. The water was rough, white-capped waves crashing against rocky shores. Her phone rang, the CIA secure line. "We need to talk about Berlin," Carlson said without preamble. Joan closed her eyes. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building like a storm on the horizon. "Director at 7?" she asked. "Yes. Shepard had files we didn't know existed, details about an operation you ran in Berlin in '87. Something called Snowdrop?" Joan's hand tightened on the phone. Snowdrop, the one operation she'd never reported to anyone, the one secret she'd kept even from Moscow. "I buried that operation 30 years ago," she said. "Well, it's been exhumed. And Joan, there are survivors. People who remember the Snow Maiden, people who want revenge." Joan ended the call and walked outside, letting the cold Maine wind cut through her jacket. The past, it seemed, wasn't finished with her yet. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood ran cold. It was a photograph from Berlin, December 1987. She stood in a snowy courtyard, rifle in hand, surrounded by bodies. But one figure at the edge of the frame was circled in red, a young man, barely visible, escaping through a doorway. Below the photo, a message in German. "You missed one." Joan deleted the message and walked back inside. She pulled out a locked case from beneath her bed, one she'd hoped never to open again. Inside was a disassembled rifle, several passports in different names, and currency from a dozen countries. She looked at the peaceful Maine cottage, at the letter from Bill and Martha, at the simple life she'd almost managed to claim. Then she began to clean and reassemble the rifle with hands that remembered every piece, every motion. The past wasn't done with her. Berlin was calling the Snow Maiden home for one last winter, one final reckoning. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she would sit by her window, drink tea, and watch the ocean rage against the shore. Tonight, she would be Joan Miller, retired stenographer, keeper of no secrets except the ones that refused to die. The white queen chess piece sat on the mantel where she'd placed it, watching with carved eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom and sorrow of a game that never truly ended. Tomorrow, she would decide whether to run toward the past or away from it. Tomorrow, she would choose whether Joan Miller lived or died, whether the Snow Maiden had one more winter left in her. But tonight, she was just a woman in a cottage by the sea, waiting for a phone call she knew would come, preparing for a journey she'd hoped never to take. The waves crashed endlessly against the shore, each one erasing footprints in the sand only for new ones to appear. Like the past, Joan thought. No matter how many times you think you've erased it, it always leaves new marks. Her secure phone rang one more time. She let it ring 3 times before answering. Directorate 7 activated, a voice said in Russian. An automated message, triggered by something, somewhere. Authentication required, the voice continued. Joan spoke the words she'd memorized 30 years ago, words she'd never thought to use again. The snow returns to Moscow, but it never forgets Berlin. Authenticated. Asset Marina confirmed. Stand by for instructions. The line went dead. Joan set down the phone and laughed, a sound without humor. After everything, the testimony, the exposure, the choice to tell the truth, she was still trapped in the same game, just playing for different stakes. Outside, snow began to fall, unusual for Maine in this season. But then, she thought, everything about her life had been unusual. She picked up Bill's letter one more time, reading his offer of normalcy, of a simple life in Oregon. Then she looked at the rifle she'd just assembled, at the passports with names of women who didn't exist, at the life of shadows calling her back. The Snow Maiden never melts, she whispered to herself. She only hibernates, waiting for winter to return. The phone rang again. This time, it was Lewis. Joan, there's been a development. Someone leaked the Berlin files to the media. They're saying you were involved in something called Operation Snowdrop. They're saying there were civilian casualties. Joan closed her eyes. The last secret, the one she'd killed to keep, was finally in the light. Joan, are you there? I'm here, Major, she said quietly. But I won't be for long. What does that mean? She looked out at the falling snow, each flake a memory, a ghost, a choice she'd made in younger days when the world seemed clearer, when orders were absolute, and conscience was a luxury she couldn't afford. It means the past never stays buried, Major. It just waits for the right moment to rise. She ended the call and stood, gathering what she needed. The rifle, broken down and concealed. One passport, not Joan Miller, not Marina Volkov, but something in between. Money, enough to disappear. As she prepared to leave the cottage for the last time, she placed the white queen chess piece on the table with a note. The game continues. Then Joan Miller, Marina Volkov, the Snow Maiden, walked out into the snowing night, disappearing into the storm that had been chasing her for 30 years. Behind her, the cottage stood empty except for echoes and shadows, waiting for someone who would never return, holding secrets that would never be told. The last anyone saw of her was a figure walking along the shore, footprints filling with snow as quickly as they were made, until there was nothing left but winter and waves and the endless patient sea.
The stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new episodes are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to our EV Story channel, and turn on the bell. See you in the next story.